Wife of millionaire gives birth to baby. Over 1 meter tall, doctors stunned. Emily Thompson always believed her destiny was written in the stars above Manhattan. Born and raised in a small house in Brooklyn, she learned early on that life was made of tough choices and small victories. Her mother, Margaret, supported the family by selling snacks on the beach, while her father had left in search of work up north, leaving behind only empty promises and a few faded photographs. By the age of 25, Emily had achieved more than many expected. Graduating with a nursing degree from Columbia University, she split her time between shifts at St. Luke's Hospital and a social project that provided free care to residents of her community. Her curly hair and tan skin contrasted with the pristine white lab coat she wore with such pride. It was on a particularly hectic morning at the hospital that fate decided to change the course of her story. Alexander Carter, 35, CEO of biotech. America, one of the largest biotechnology companies in the country, was admitted to the emergency room with an anxiety attack. Tall, elegant, with piercing green eyes and an air of mystery that intrigued everyone around him, Alexander wasn't the type of patient who usually frequented St. Luke's. "Your vitals are stabilizing," Emily informed, adjusting the heart monitor, "but it would be wise to run some additional tests." Alexander, still catching his breath, fixed his gaze on her. "Are you always this professional, nurse?" Emily Thompson," she replied, trying to maintain her composure under that magnetic stare. "Emily," he repeated, as if savoring each syllable. "You know, this isn't my first episode. I work under immense pressure, handling projects that could change the future of humanity." Emily's curiosity was immediately piqued. "What kind of projects?" "Advanced biotechnology. We're developing revolutionary treatments, cures for diseases once thought incurable." He paused, studying her reactions. "Perhaps you could help me better understand the human side of medicine." The invitation for coffee after her shift came naturally, almost inevitably. Emily knew she should maintain professionalism, but there was something about Alexander that drew her in inexplicably. At the elegant cafe in Beverly Hills, he spoke about his company, his dreams of revolutionizing medicine, and most of all, how impressed he was with her dedication to social work. "People like you are rare, Emily. You see beyond appearances, beyond titles and money." The meetings multiplied in the following weeks. Alexander took her to places she only knew from movies, sophisticated restaurants, theaters, concerts. His world was fascinating and frightening at the same time. Emily realized she was falling in love, not with the powerful businessman, but with the vulnerable man who revealed himself in moments of intimacy. Yet, there was something in the air of mystery surrounding him that unsettled her. Sometimes, during their conversations, Alexander seemed distant, lost in thoughts he didn't share. His calls were often interrupted by urgent matters, and occasionally she caught him watching her with a disturbing intensity. Margaret, with the wisdom of her years, warned her daughter, "My dear, a rich man like that, full of secrets, can bring trouble. Your heart is beating faster than your head." Emily smiled, hugging her mother. "Sometimes we need to take risks to be happy, Mum. And Alexander, he's different." The marriage proposal came 6 months later, during a candlelit dinner at his penthouse in Malibu. The view of the ocean was breathtaking, but not as much as the diamond ring he slid onto her finger. "I want to build a future with you, Emily, an extraordinary future." As tears of happiness blurred her vision, Emily didn't notice the strange glint in Alexander's eyes, nor the way his hands trembled slightly as he embraced her. The fairy tale was just beginning, and like all great love stories, the deepest secrets were yet to come. Emily and Alexander's wedding was the event of the year in New York City. The ceremony, held in the gardens of the Ritz-Carlton, brought together the elite of New York City society and prominent figures from the international scientific community. The contrast among the guests was evident. On one side, residents of Brooklyn dressed in their finest attire. On the other, businessmen in Italian suits and renowned scientists discussing the latest advancements in biotechnology. Margaret, radiant in her turquoise blue dress, couldn't hold back her tears as she watched her daughter walk down the red carpet. Emily looked stunning in her French lace gown, her dark curls adorned with small jasmine flowers. Alexander waited for her at the altar, more elegant than ever, though his eyes betrayed a restlessness that few noticed. During the reception, Emily noticed the presence of a man who kept watching them. Tall, with graying hair and a faint scar. Near his left eye, he maintained a serious expression as he conversed with other guests. When he finally approached to greet the newlyweds, he introduced himself as Dr. Richard Vaughan. "An old research partner," Alexander quickly explained, his hand lightly squeezing Emily's arm. "But that was a long time ago, wasn't it, Richard?" "Long enough for many interesting discoveries," Richard replied with an enigmatic smile. "Does your wife know about our special projects?" "Not the time for work discussions," Alexander cut in, his voice taking on a tone Emily had never heard before. The honeymoon in the Maldives was like a dream, filled with days of diving in crystal-clear waters and starlit nights. But even there, Emily noticed how Alexander occasionally isolated himself to make mysterious calls or spend hours on his laptop. When questioned, he always brushed it off, saying they were urgent company matters. Back in America, the couple settled into a mansion in Malibu. Emily left her job at the hospital, but insisted on maintaining her social project in the community. Alexander arranged for a fully equipped clinic in Brooklyn, transforming the small health post into a model care center. "You can help so many more people now," he said, kissing her forehead, "and you'll have more time for us, for our family." The idea of starting a family had always been part of the couple's plans, but their attempts to conceive in the first few months were unsuccessful. Alexander insisted they consult the best fertility specialists in the country. The appointments were always at private clinics, with doctors who seemed more interested in speaking with Alexander in private than in examining Emily. "It's just a matter of time," assured Dr. Charles Miller, the specialist chosen by Alexander. "You're both young and healthy, but perhaps we should consider some experimental treatments." Emily began to notice subtle changes in her husband's behavior. He spent more time at the biotech lab, coming home late at night with deep bags under his eyes and a worried expression. Sometimes she found him in the office in the early hours of the morning, surrounded by papers and speaking in video conferences, in languages she didn't understand. One night, while Alexander was in the shower, Emily found an envelope that had fallen from his jacket. Inside was a series of genetic tests with her name on them, dated from before they had even met. When confronted, Alexander claimed it was standard company procedure to keep medical records of all employees and their families. "You're being paranoid, my love," he said, hugging her. "I just want to make sure you're healthy, that our baby will be perfect." His words should have been comforting, but something in his tone made Emily shiver. That same week, she received an anonymous call. "Mrs. Carter, not everything that glitters is gold. There are things about your husband and biotech that you need to know." Before Emily could respond, the call dropped. She tried to trace the number, but it was a disposable phone. The seed of doubt had been planted, and with it, a foreboding that her perfect life was about to change drastically. After 2 years of failed attempts, the positive pregnancy test caught Emily by surprise. It was a Sunday morning, and she stared in disbelief at the 2 pink lines that would change her life forever. Alexander was at a conference in Singapore, and his first reaction upon receiving the news via video call was a prolonged silence, followed by a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "This is extraordinary," he murmured, running his hands through the grey hair at his temples. "Don't move, I'm coming back on the first flight." 12 hours later, Alexander arrived home accompanied by Dr. Miller and a full medical team. Emily was surprised by the speed and intensity of the mobilization. "Love, it's just a pharmacy test. We don't need all this fuss," she argued as a nurse drew her blood. "Emily, you don't understand," Alexander replied, his eyes gleaming in an unusual way. "This baby is special. We need to monitor everything from the very beginning." The following weeks were a whirlwind of tests and consultations. Emily noticed that all the results were sent directly to Alexander and a specific team at Biotech, America. When she requested access to her own test results, she received only simplified and vague reports. The first sign that something was different came in the 2nd month. Her abdomen was growing at an alarming rate, as if the pregnancy was accelerated. The nausea was intense, but unlike anything she had ever heard of in her years of nursing. It was accompanied by a sensation of electric energy coursing through her body. "Alexander, this isn't normal," she remarked one night, observing her reflection in the mirror. "I look like I'm 5 months along, but it's only been 8 weeks. "Every pregnancy is unique, my love," he replied automatically, without looking away from his laptop. "The doctors are monitoring everything." Margaret, upon visiting her daughter, was visibly concerned. "Sweetheart, this isn't right. I've had 3 children and never seen a belly grow this fast. And your eyes? So different, almost too bright." Emily had noticed the change in her eyes. The usual brown now had tiny golden specks, like microscopic stars. The changes in her body didn't stop there. Her hair was growing at an astonishing rate, and her skin emitted a faint glow as if lit from within. One afternoon, while organizing Alexander's office, she found a forgotten flash drive in a drawer. Curiosity was stronger than her respect for her husband's privacy. The files contained coded reports and ultrasound images unlike any she had seen during her appointments. In a folder labeled Project Genesis, she found her photo alongside other women, all accompanied by technical notes she couldn't understand. The sound of footsteps in the hallway made her quickly shut down the computer. It was Helen, the new housekeeper Alexander had hired, a serious woman who always seemed to be nearby, watching. "Mrs. Carter, Dr. Miller is here for your appointment," Helen announced, her eyes scanning the office suspiciously. The appointments had become daily. The doctor measured her belly, drew blood, and performed ultrasounds with a machine Emily had never seen in her years at the hospital. That afternoon, something on the monitor caught her attention. "Doctor, what are these bright spots around the baby?" "Just imaging artifacts, nothing to worry about," he replied quickly, turning off the machine. But Emily was sure of what she saw. Her baby was surrounded by some kind of luminous aura. That night, alone in her room while Alexander attended yet another video conference, Emily began researching atypical pregnancies and genetic experiments. The information she found was disturbing. Reports of secret experiments, theories about genetic manipulation, mysterious cases of extraordinary pregnancies that vanished without explanation. An anonymous email arrived in her inbox. "Look for Dr. Sophia Adams. She knows the truth about Project Genesis. Be careful who you trust." Marina ran her hand over her prominent belly, feeling movements that seemed more conscious and coordinated than they should be at this stage of her pregnancy. Her baby wasn't just growing, it was developing in a way that defied all the laws of nature. "What's happening to me?" she whispered to her reflection in the mirror, watching the golden flecks in her eyes glow more intensely in the darkness of the room. The search for Sophia Adams turned out to be more complicated than Marina had imagined. The scientist had disappeared from the academic circuit 3 years earlier, after publishing a controversial paper on directed evolution in human embryos. Her last public appearances coincided with the period when Alexander began aggressively expanding Biotech America's research division. Marina managed to locate Sophia's old lab at Columbia University, now occupied by another researcher. Dr. Paul Rivers, a white-haired man with a kind gaze, immediately recognized Alexander Carter's. "Sophia was brilliant. Perhaps too brilliant," he remarked, closing the lab door. "She discovered something she shouldn't have, something related to biotech's experiments. After that, she simply vanished." "What kind of experiments?" Marina asked, feeling the baby stir restlessly in her womb. "Advanced genetic manipulation. Sophia developed a revolutionary method to modify DNA during gestation, but she realized her research was being used unethically." The professor hesitated, glancing nervously at the empty university hallways. "Mrs. Carter, your pregnancy, there's something different about it, isn't there?" Marina felt a chill run down her spine. How could he know? Before she could respond, her phone buzzed with a message from Helen. Alexander had returned early and was asking for her. At home, she found her husband in the private lab he maintained in the basement of the mansion. The place was strictly off limits to Emily, but that night the door was slightly ajar. Raised voices came from inside. "The genetic markers are developing. Better than expected. She recognized Dr. Miller's voice. "The fetus shows signs of advanced consciousness and accelerated development." "And the side effects on the mother?" an unfamiliar voice asked. "Manageable," Alexander replied curtly. "Emily is stronger than we imagined. Her DNA has extraordinary compatibility with the project." "Compatibility isn't a coincidence, Carter," the unfamiliar voice shot back. "You chose her because of her family history, didn't you? The experiments with her grandmother." Emily stepped back silently, her mind racing. What experiments? What did her grandmother have to do with this? She remembered the stories Margaret used to tell about her own mother, who worked as a cleaner at a university hospital in the 60s. Stories about mysterious medical tests, about women who were paid to participate in special studies. That night, Emily waited for Alexander to fall asleep and accessed his personal computer. The password wasn't hard to figure out. It was the date of their first meeting at the hospital. The files she found made her blood run cold. There was a complete dossier on her family, going back 3 generations. Her grandmother was listed as Subject 23 in a project called Forerunner. Black and white photos showed young women in hospital beds, all with the same vacant expression. At the end of the report, a note in red: "Genetic lineage preserved. Potential for Project Genesis confirmed." Emily ran her hand over her enormous belly, feeling movements that now seemed to have a defined purpose. The baby responded to her touch almost consciously, as if understanding her discoveries. A noise in the hallway made her jump. Helen was standing at the door, her usually impassive face showing a genuine expression of concern. "Mrs. Emily," she whispered, "there's something I need to tell you. I'm not just a housekeeper. Sophia Adams sent me to protect you." Before Helen could continue, they heard footsteps approaching. Quickly, she slipped a folded piece of paper into the pocket of Emily's robe and disappeared into the dark hallway. The paper contained only a sentence and an address. "The truth about Project Genesis lies in the underground archives of biotech, Laboratory X7. Emily carefully tucked the paper away, her heart racing. For the first time since discovering her pregnancy, she felt real fear, not for herself, but for the extraordinary being growing inside her. What did Alexander and his team really intend? Why had they chosen her? And more importantly, what would they do with her baby once it was born? The opportunity to investigate Laboratory X7 came during Biotech America's annual event. Alexander would be busy with presentations and meetings all day, allowing Emily to explore the company's facilities for the first time since they married. Helen had arranged for a full-access badge, claiming it was for an official visit by the CEO's wife to the facilities. Wearing an executive outfit that barely disguised her 6-month belly, though she was only 3 months along, Emily crossed the main lobby of the imposing building. Employees greeted her respectfully, some casting curious glances at her prominent belly. "The basement is accessed through the private elevator," Helen instructed through the small earpiece they had agreed to use. "Your badge has clearance. But be careful. You have a maximum of 20 minutes before someone notices your presence down there." The elevator descended silently, and Emily felt the baby moving more intensely, as if it too were apprehensive. When the doors opened, a sterilized hallway was revealed with numbered doors in sequence. Laboratory X7 was at the end of the corridor. The environment was surreal. Glass walls revealed containment tanks filled with liquids of different colors. Screens displayed DNA sequences and complex graphs. On a central table, Emily found folders labeled Project Genesis, Final Phase. "My God," she whispered, flipping through the documents. The reports detailed a genetic modification program initiated decades earlier. The goal was to create humans with extraordinary abilities, enhanced strength, superior intelligence, extended longevity. The first attempts, carried out with her grandmother's generation, established the genetic foundations. Now, with modern technology, the project was on the verge of achieving its goal. "Emily?" Helen's voice sounded urgent through the earpiece. "There's movement in the hallway. You need to get out of there." But Emily couldn't move. Her hands trembled as she read a specific document about her pregnancy. The baby wasn't just a success of the experiment, it was the first of a new lineage. Its DNA had been modified to develop abilities beyond the current understanding of science. A video file caught her attention. On the screen, she recognized Alexander in a meeting with investors, years before they had met. Project Genesis isn't just about genetic enhancement, he explained in the video. It's about directed evolution. We need to find the perfect candidate, someone with a genetic code compatible with our modifications. When we find her, the next step in human evolution will be possible. Marina felt the ground slip from beneath her feet. Her entire relationship, the meeting at the hospital, the marriage, had it all been planned? Was she just a perfect candidate for Arthur's experiment? The sound of approaching voices snapped her back to reality. Quickly, she snapped photos of some documents with her phone and headed for the exit. But before she could reach the door, a familiar figure blocked her path. Mrs. Mendez, Dr. Richard Vaughan, the man with the scar from the wedding, smiled coldly. What a pleasant surprise. I wasn't aware you had clearance to access this area. I was just getting to know Arthur's work. She tried to stay calm, acutely aware of the weight of the photographed documents on her phone. Fascinating, isn't it? He stepped closer, his eyes fixed on her belly. Did you know your baby is the first successful case in 3 generations of attempts? The other pregnancies, well, let's just say they didn't have a happy ending. Marina felt a shiver run down her spine. The baby kicked violently, as if responding to the veiled threat in Richard's words. I need to find Arthur, she said, trying to move past him. Of course, Richard smiled, but his eyes remained cold. He'll be very interested to hear about your little exploration today. In the elevator, Marina finally breathed. Her hands trembled as she typed a message to Helen. We need to find Sophia Adams immediately. The response came in seconds. I've already arranged it. She's expecting us tonight, but Emily, there's more. Biotech America isn't the only one interested in your baby. There are other groups, and they're getting closer. As she left the building, Emily realized that nothing in her life would ever be the same again. The fairy tale had turned into a scientific nightmare, and she was at the center of a conspiracy larger than she could have imagined. She caressed her belly, feeling the now familiar movements of the baby. No matter what you are, she whispered. To her unborn child, I'll protect you from all of them, even if it's from your own father. The meeting with Sophia Adams was set in an old house in Greenwich Village, a historic neighborhood in New York City. The sun was setting over Hudson Bay as Emily, accompanied by Helen, climbed the steep stairs leading to the residence. The place seemed abandoned, with windows boarded up and an overgrown garden. Are you sure this is the right place? Emily asked, feeling the baby stir unusually. Helen nodded, typing a code into a discreet panel hidden behind ivy. The door opened, silently, revealing a surprisingly modern interior. State-of-the-art laboratory equipment occupied what should have been the living room. Sophia Adams was nothing like Emily had imagined. The scientist, who appeared to be around 50, had a gentle face framed by short, graying hair. Her hands, marked by small lab scars, trembled slightly as she served tea. Finally we meet, Emily, Sophia smiled sadly. You know, I've been observing you for a long time, since before Alexander entered your life. What do you mean? Emily asked, her hand instinctively protecting her belly. Because I knew your grandmother, Sophia replied, pulling an old folder from a nearby cabinet. Maria das Dores Santos. She wasn't just Subject 23 to me. She was a real person, with dreams and fears, like all the other women they used in their experiments. Sophia opened the folder, revealing old photographs and yellowed documents. Project Genesis began almost 50 years ago, long before it got that pompous name. In the beginning, it was just tests in underserved communities. They promised free medical treatment, money, benefits. What the volunteers didn't know was that they were being prepared for something much bigger. Prepared? How? Helen asked, her professional demeanor momentarily broken by curiosity. By altering their DNA gradually, generation after generation. Your grandmother Emily was one of the few who survived the initial procedures. Her genetic code proved exceptionally adaptable to the modifications. That trait was passed down to your mother and then to you. Emily felt the tea churn in her stomach. Is that why Alexander chose me? He spent years searching for you, Sophia confirmed, analyzing genetic data from thousands of women, looking for the perfect combination. When he finally found you, he orchestrated every detail of your chance meeting at the hospital. But why? What is the true goal of Project Genesis? Sophia hesitated, glancing nervously at the windows. They want to create a new species, Emily. Genetically superior humans, capable of things that seem impossible. Your baby, he's just the first. If they succeed, they plan to expand the program. Imagine hundreds, thousands of children like yours. This is madness, Emily exclaimed, feeling the baby move violently. It's ambition, Sophia corrected. Alexander and his investors believe they're guiding the next step in human evolution, but they don't consider the ethical consequences, the human suffering involved. That's why I left the project. Sophia stood up, walking over to a computer. Look at this, she said, showing ultrasound images. These are scans from previous pregnancies in the project. Babies that develop too quickly, causing severe complications for the mothers. None of them. Stop, Helen interrupted, noticing Emily's pale face. I'm sorry, Sophia sighed, but you need to understand the danger you're in. Your baby is different from the others. He is developing in a controlled, stable manner. It's exactly what they wanted. And what happens after he's born? Emily asked, her voice trembling. They have facilities ready, labs equipped to study every aspect of his development. Alexander is already planning the next phase, using your son's DNA to refine the process to create more babies like him. Emily stood up abruptly, staggering. The baby moved like never before, as if responding to the revelations. There's one more thing, Sophia said, handing a flash drive to Emily. I found out there's an internal dispute at biotech. Richard Vaughan and other investors want to take control of the project. They think Alexander has become emotionally compromised. Because of me? Emily asked. Because he truly fell in love with you, Sophia replied softly. That wasn't part of the plan. Alexander was supposed to maintain emotional distance, treat you only as a participant in the experiment. But something changed. A noise outside made them all jump. Helen ran to check the security cameras. We have company, she announced tensely. Biotech cars. We need to get you out of here, Emily. Use the back exit, Sophia instructed quickly. And Emily, be careful with Helen. Not everyone is who they seem to be in this story. As they escaped through the back door, Emily clutched the flash drive in her hand, her mind spinning with the revelations. Her baby wasn't just her child. It was the result of decades of experimentation, the first of a new era that could change humanity forever. And now more than ever, she needed to decide who to trust to protect him. The confrontation was inevitable. Emily found Alexander in his private office, his eyes fixed on monitors displaying footage of her leaving Sophia's house. He didn't seem surprised, just tired. How long were you planning to hide this from me? Emily asked, her voice trembling with restrained anger. That I'm just part of an experiment, that our son is a scientific project. Alexander slowly turned off the monitors, running his hands over his exhausted face. At first, yes, you were. Just part of the project. The perfect candidate we'd been searching for decades. But Emily, something changed. What changed, Alexander? The fact that I successfully got pregnant? That your precious experiment finally worked? No. He stood up abruptly. I fell in love with you, truly. And that complicated everything. Emily felt the baby move intensely, as if reacting to the tension in the room. Complicated your scientific plans? Complicated my life, Alexander replied, cautiously stepping closer. The Biotech America board is questioning my leadership. Richard Vaughan has been convincing investors that I've become emotionally compromised, that I've lost my scientific objectivity. And are they wrong? Alexander hesitated, his green eyes fixed on Emily's prominent belly. No, they're right. I should be thinking only about scientific advancements, about the possibilities for humanity. But all I can think about is you and our child. Child? Emily laughed bitterly. Until now, you only referred to him as the experiment, the project. Because I was afraid, Alexander confessed, his voice breaking. Afraid to admit that we created more than a scientific breakthrough. We created a life, our life. At that moment, the office lights flickered and all the electronic equipment began to experience interference. It was something that had been happening frequently whenever Emily became too emotionally distressed. What's happening to me, Alexander? To our baby? Alexander stepped closer, gently touching Emily's belly. The baby responded immediately, causing a visible ripple under her skin. He's extraordinary, Alexander whispered, more than we ever imagined. The modified DNA hasn't just affected his physical development, it's created abilities we can't fully understand yet. What do you mean? The electromagnetic fields you've been generating, the way electronic devices react to your presence, the mental connection you seem to have with the baby. These are manifestations of something entirely new in human evolution. Emily stepped back, frightened. And what happens after he's born? Will they turn him into a lab experiment? No, Alexander exclaimed. That was the original plan, but now, Emily, we need to protect him. Richard and the others, they don't understand. They only see the scientific potential, the military, applications, the commercial value. And you, what do you see? I see our son, and I see the mistake I made by starting all of this. Alexander walked to his safe, typing in a long sequence of numbers. That's why I prepared this. He handed Emily a thick envelope. Inside were passports, documents, credit cards, all with fake names. There's a house ready in New Zealand. Completely isolated, secure. You and the baby can disappear, start a new life far away from all of this. And you? I need to stay. Dismantle the project from the inside out. Destroy all the research, all the data. Make sure no one can replicate what we've done. Emily felt tears streaming down her face. Why should I trust you now? Because I'm still the same man you fell in love with. I just took too long to realize what truly mattered. The moment was interrupted by an alert on Alexander's computer. The security cameras showed several cars entering the property. Richard, Alexander murmured. He must have found out about your visit to Sophia. Emily, you need to go now. And Helen? Don't trust her, Alexander warned, typing rapidly on his computer. She's a double agent. She's been working for Richard for years. Emily felt the world spin. Another person she had trusted. Another betrayal. Alexander, We don't have time, he interrupted, guiding her to a secret door behind the bookshelf. This tunnel leads to the back garage. There's a car ready. Go to LaGuardia Airport. A private jet is waiting. Before Emily could protest, Alexander kissed her intensely. I'll find you as soon as I can. I promise. As Emily hurried down the dark tunnel, she could hear raised voices coming from the office. Her baby moved restlessly as if sensing the danger. We'll be okay, she whispered, stroking her belly. Mommy will protect you. But as she drove through the night in New York City, Emily couldn't help but wonder if she was making the right choice. Alexander seemed sincere, but he had lied before. And now, with Helen revealed as a traitor, who else could she trust? LaGuardia Airport was eerily quiet that night. Emily drove cautiously, constantly checking the rearview mirror for possible pursuers. Her entire body buzzed with a strange energy, something that had been happening more frequently in recent weeks. As she parked the car, a familiar figure emerged from the shadows. Margaret, her mother, was waiting near the entrance to the private terminal. Mum, how? Alexander called me, Mrs. Margaret explained, hugging her daughter. He said you'd need me, that he couldn't let you go through this alone. Alexander's unexpected gesture caught her off guard. Maybe he really was trying to protect them. Mrs. Carter, a pilot discreetly approached. The jet is ready. We need to take off in 20 minutes. As they walked toward the boarding area, Emily noticed suspicious movements. Men in suits were watching from a distance, speaking into communicators. Mom, something's wrong, Emily whispered. We need to... Before she could finish the sentence, the airport lights began flickering violently. Electronic equipment around them malfunctioned. The baby stirred like never before. "Calm down, my love," Emily murmured, caressing her belly. "Everything will be fine." A familiar voice echoed through the terminal. "Emily!" It was Helen, accompanied by Richard Vaughan and a Biotech America security team. "Don't take another step," Richard ordered. "You're jeopardizing years of research. The baby needs to be monitored at our facility." Mrs. Margaret stepped between them and her daughter. "You won't get anywhere near my daughter." "Mrs. Thompson." Helen stepped forward, her tone falsely conciliatory. "Your family has been part of this project for generations. Your own mother contributed to this moment. You're not going to stand in the way of scientific progress now, are you?" "My mother was used as a guinea pig," Margaret shot back. "And now you want to do the same to my daughter and my grandson?" The tension in the air was palpable. The electronic equipment continued to fail, and Emily could feel a growing energy emanating from her body. "The baby is reacting to the stress," Richard observed, consulting a handheld device. "The energy levels are off the charts. If we don't get her to the lab now..." That's when the glass doors of the terminal spontaneously shattered. Alarms blared, and chaos erupted. "Emily!" A new voice called out amid the confusion. It was Sophia Adams, accompanied by a group of people Emily recognized from the Project Genesis files, other scientists who had abandoned the program. "Hurry!" Sophia shouted. "We have another jet ready." Richard pulled out a strange device. "I'm sorry, but I can't allow that. This is a targeted electromagnetic pulse. It will temporarily neutralize the special abilities of the baby." Before he could activate the device, all the lights at the airport exploded simultaneously, plunging the terminal into darkness. The baby was protecting himself and his mother. "Now!" Sophia ordered. Amid the chaos and darkness, Emily felt her mother and Sophia guiding her through an alternate route. Sirens blared in the distance, and frantic voices echoed through the terminal. "Alexander predicted this," Sophia explained as they ran. "That's why he prepared multiple escape routes. Richard isn't the only one interested in the baby. There are international organizations monitoring Project Genesis." When they reached the secondary runway, a helicopter was waiting with its blades spinning. "Where are we going?" Emily asked, helping her mother board. "First to a safe location. In the countryside of Colorado," Sophia replied. "After that, well, Alexander didn't tell me the final destination. The fewer people who know, the better." As the helicopter took off, Emily saw Richard and his team emerging onto the runway, powerless. The lights of New York City glowed below, and for the first time in hours, the baby calmed down. "Alexander told me something before I left," Emily said, breaking the tense silence. "That Helen was a double agent, but she seemed clearly on Richard's side. What's really going on?" Sophia exchanged a meaningful look with Margaret. "The truth, Emily, is even more complex than you imagine. Helen isn't a double agent. She's a triple agent, and the real reason your baby is so special, well, it has to do with something that happened much earlier, even before Project Genesis existed." Emily felt a shiver run down her spine. Just when she thought she had uncovered all the layers of the conspiracy, a new revelation emerged. But now, flying over the American night, one thing was certain: there was no turning back. The refuge in Colorado was an old coffee farm, isolated among lush green mountains. The colonial mansion had been adapted with state-of-the-art equipment, camouflaged behind centuries-old walls. Emily settled in a room on the second floor, watched the sunrise as Sophia prepared to tell the full story. "It all started much earlier than we imagine," Sophia began, sitting in an old armchair. "In the 1950s, a scientific expedition in the Amazon rainforest discovered something extraordinary, an isolated tribe whose members displayed unique abilities. Margaret, who hadn't left her daughter's side since their escape, interrupted. "My mother, she mentioned something about special Indians when she was delirious at the end of her life." "Exactly," Sophia confirmed. "The tribe of the Guardians, as they were called, had a special connection with the planet's natural energy. They could influence electromagnetic fields, communicate telepathically, and heal rapidly. The government at the time kept it all secret, but began studying their DNA. Emily felt the baby move, as it always did when important revelations came to light. And what does this have to do with Project Genesis? Your grandmother wasn't just another volunteer, Emily. She was descended from that tribe. She was one of the last pure guardians, taken from her village as a child and raised in orphanages. The original project aimed to understand and replicate the abilities of the guardians. But why? Power, a new voice answered. Helen was standing at the door, but she no longer seemed like the submissive housekeeper. Her posture was different, regal. It has always been about power. Helen is one of the last direct descendants of the Guardians, Sophia explained. She infiltrated biotech to monitor the project, to ensure the ancestral knowledge wasn't corrupted. So you weren't working for Richard, Helen smiled. Richard, Alexander, government agencies, they all have their own agendas. My mission has always been to protect the legacy of the Guardians, and you, Emily, carry the purest blood of that lineage in generations. The baby stirred violently, causing a wave of energy that made all the lights in the mansion flicker. He knows, Helen murmured. He feels the connection to his ancestors. Did Alexander know all of this? Emily asked, her voice trembling. Not at first, Sophia replied. He thought he was creating something new with genetic engineering. When he discovered the truth about the Guardians, something changed in him. He realized he wasn't creating life. He was awakening something ancient, sacred. That's when Richard began conspiring against him, Helen added. He and the other investors don't want to preserve the knowledge of the Guardians. They want to turn it into weapons, into commercial products. Emily stood up, walking to the window. Outside, dark clouds were forming, mirroring her turbulent emotions. What now? What happens? Alexander is on his way, Helen revealed. He managed to recover all the project data and destroyed biotech's laboratories. But Richard, he has other plans. As if responding to Helen's words, a helicopter appeared on the horizon. But it wasn't just one. There were several. They've found us, Sophia whispered. The baby stirred again, and Emily felt a different energy coursing through her body. It was as if every cell vibrated in harmony with something greater, something ancient. Emily, Helen approached, her eyes glowing with an eerie light. The time has come for you to accept who you truly are. The Guardians weren't just people with special abilities. They were protectors of the natural balance. Your son isn't a scientific experiment. He is a rebirth. Thunder rumbled in the distance and the rain began to fall. Emily could feel the power growing within her, ancient and new at the same time. What should I do? Trust your instincts, Helen replied. The blood of the Guardians runs through your veins, and now more than ever, we need to protect that legacy. The helicopters were closing in, and with them, Emily knew, came the final battle. It was no longer just about her, or her baby. It was about ancient knowledge that couldn't fall into the wrong hands. My daughter, Margaret held her hand. Your grandmother always said that some gifts come with responsibilities. Emily closed her eyes, feeling the energy of the Guardians flowing through her. When she opened them again, they were golden like the sun. I'm ready. The storm forming over the farm was not natural. The lightning tore through the sky in impossible patterns, and the wind carried whispers in a long-forgotten language. Emily, standing in the center of the garden, felt the ancestral energy of the Guardians flowing through her like never before. The helicopters landed in a circular formation around the property. Richard Vaughan emerged from the first one, accompanied by a team of armed men with special equipment. It doesn't have to be this way, Emily, he shouted against the howling wind. Think of the progress we could achieve together, the knowledge of the Guardians combined with our technology. Progress? Helen stepped forward, her eyes also glowing. With the golden light characteristic of the Guardians, you want to turn a sacred gift into a weapon. A new helicopter appeared on the horizon, and Emily's heart raced as she recognized the silhouette of Alexander. Her husband had made it in time. Emily! Alexander ran toward her as soon as he landed. I did it! I destroyed all the data, all the records of the project. Richard laughed, a cold sound that echoed through the valley. You really think we didn't have backups? Secondary laboratories? Alexander, Your naivety has always been your weakness." "No," Alexander smiled, for the first time seeming truly at peace. "Your greed is your weakness, Richard. You never understood what Project Genesis was really about." The baby chose that moment to make its presence known. A wave of pure energy emanated from Emily's womb, creating a visible force field around her. The clouds above began to swirl in a spiral pattern. "This is impossible," Richard exclaimed, frantically consulting his instruments. "The energy, sir, it's greater than anything we've ever recorded." Sophia stepped forward, joining Helen. "The Guardians were never a scientific experiment, Richard. They were the protectors of natural balance. And now, after generations, their power is returning through Emily and her child." As if responding to her words, other figures emerged from the surrounding forest. Dozens of people, all with the same golden eyes, approached silently. "The descendants of the Guardians," Helen explained. "Scattered across the world but always connected, always waiting for the moment of return." Emily felt a deep connection with each of them, as if she could hear their thoughts, feel their stories across generations. Her baby would be the first, born with the full power of the Guardians in over half a century. "It's over, Richard," Alexander declared. "The knowledge of the Guardians belongs to no corporation or government. It belongs to the land, to nature." Richard, realizing he was losing control of the situation, pulled a device from his pocket. "Then no one will have this power." Before he could activate whatever it was, a wave of collective energy emanated from all the Guardians present. The device exploded in his hands, and all electronic equipment within a radius of miles was neutralized. Emily felt contractions begin. The baby was coming. "Now!" she gasped. "He wants to be born now." Helen and the other female Guardians formed a circle around her. The sky above opened up, revealing a starry expanse impossible for that time of day. "It's a gift," Margaret whispered, tears streaming down her face. "The sky your grandmother saw in the village." The birth was quick, almost painless, as if nature itself was assisting. When the baby was born, he didn't cry. Instead, he opened his eyes, golden like the sun, and smiled. Richard and his men had vanished during the process, realizing they were facing something far greater than their earthly ambitions. "It's a boy," Alexander murmured, holding his son for the first time. "And he is." "Perfect," Emily finished. "Simply perfect." The baby, named Ethan, which means rising sun in the Navajo language, would grow up between two worlds, the modern and the ancestral. Biotech America would continue to exist, but under new leadership, Alexander and Emily transformed the company into a foundation dedicated to preserving traditional knowledge and protecting the remaining forests. The Guardians no longer needed to hide. Through Ethan, a new era began, not of scientific experiments or biological weapons, but of reconnection with the ancient wisdom that had always been present. Helen remained as a protector and mentor, helping other families with Guardian heritage to discover and control their gifts. Sophia dedicated herself to documenting the true history of the Guardians, ensuring it would never again be forgotten or misunderstood. As for Emily and Alexander, they settled in a natural reserve near the ancient village of the Guardians. There, surrounded by the forest and protected by the descendants of the tribe, they raised Ethan, teaching him to balance the extraordinary gifts he had inherited with the responsibility of using them wisely. On full moon nights, when the energy of the Guardians is strongest, golden lights can still be seen dancing over the Amazon rainforest. The elders say it is the Guardians, celebrating the return of their gifts through a special child born from the union of two worlds. And so what began as an ambitious scientific project transformed into something much greater, the rebirth of an ancient wisdom that the modern world had forgotten, but now, more than ever, needed to remember.